Couple things to keep in mind with any mock scrape or any scent product. Always keep that at least at your head level or higher. You try to keep that out of a deer's range. When deer stand up, they're going to be able to reach, especially down here, Lake Ranch. You got to understand, deer's 30 inches tall, so you know, if they're just walking by and mouthing this licking branch, that's right there. It's about waist level on a person. You want to keep this high, head high or higher if possible. The other thing that I'm kind of concerned about with this one in particular, this tree, it's a box elder, it's been beat up by various licking branches that we've had on it over the past 2 years. And they will destroy those licking branches pretty quickly if they start chewing on them and pulling on them and that type of thing. So I'm going to monitor this one. If it gets pulled down, I'll move it to another branch, or I might move it to another tree a little bit farther down.
If you don't have a pre-approval, you could miss out easily. What ifs don't work when you're trying to sell?
It might have worked in the past on houses.
Thought we'd see some deer, and we saw some deer, but it shuts it down. You know, wind will shut down deer. You know, we say you hunt out west, it's windy all the time, deer are gonna move. Yes, they do, but we just didn't see quite the buck that we wanted to take on that scent.
Just because this property is a great bedding property doesn't mean you can't draw them in with a food plot of your own.
You talked about you find a lender, you get pre-approved, because let's face it, it's still not waiting around hoping that they're going to take my offer. You got to be ready to move, right?
Oh yeah, if you don't have a pre-approval, you could miss out easily. I mean, we've had it where people are like, hey, I'll take it, great. We talked to the seller, we're going to have an offer for you. In the meantime, another offer came through with their pre-approval already set, everything's set up, and the seller didn't want to wait around for a what if. So what ifs don't work when you're trying to sell.
It might have worked in the past on houses.
Right.
I remember we're going back to those days when I said $1,000 an acre land. That was back when $200,000 for a house was like, oh my gosh.
Right.
You know, and those houses just sat and sat and sat. Maybe back then you could have diddled around and took an extra month to get your approvals, but that's no longer the case.
That is not the case. Like in a down market, sellers will do land contracts. They'll do things because they can't get rid of it. But in an up market like we've been, in a record market like we've been, those just don't exist. And you're not going to see that, and you're still not seeing that right now. It's like it needs to be written, or it's if it's verbal, it doesn't count. You know, I've had a lot of people say, "Oh, I had a verbal agreement." Well, it never ends well.
Let's talk about that land contract for a second, because that's interesting. We know that's basically seller financing, right?
Yeah, the seller acts as the bank.
So what should people be concerned with, or what are some of the things you would tell me where I went in, I'm like, the guy's going to sell it to me on his own? What are the potential pitfalls there?
Well, I would highly recommend have a professional, either a real estate agent that's licensed can actually do a land contract, an attorney can do a land contract. You would want it, recognized by the county so that there's a record of it. But just on a piece of napkin isn't going to probably go very far. So a land contract can be beneficial to some parties for tax reasons. Again, I would check with an accountant. That's why I have an accountant, is to check on those things. But sometimes it's beneficial for a seller because they're not getting all their money up front. So for capital gains and stuff like that. So sometimes you can get a seller that wants to do that. But a lot of times the sellers just want their money now. They've owned it long enough. They're not worried about the capital gains or whatnot, and they just want their money. So they're not going to look at a land contract. They're going to look at for somebody that's either paying cash or financing, and they're getting their money in 30 days or 45 days or whatever it is. So land contracts right now probably will start coming back a little bit because some of these properties will start sitting on the market, and I'm not talking like a week. They'll start sitting on the market for 2 months, 4 months, 6 months. And that's a good way for a buyer to be able to possibly buy it. Here's the nice thing about a land contract versus going to the bank. A lot of times they'll take less money down, right? So instead of having to have that 20% down, they'll go like, hey, I'll do 5% down or 10% down. So there are some options for that. I'll see that a lot on big chunks sometimes, like some massive chunks where nobody's coming up with the money. So they're like, I'll do a land contract. Or those hard to sell properties, maybe it's pure swamp, maybe it's not a lot of trees. Those are the properties that you'll see a land contract when the market is more down, which over the next year or two, you'll probably start seeing more land contracts.
Okay, that's very interesting. Good thing to know.
Deer and Deer Hunting Properties is brought to you by Spy Point Trail Cameras. Deer and Deer Hunting Properties is brought to you by PH Outdoors.
Deer and Deer Hunting Properties is brought to you by Orion Hunting Products, America's #1 modular deer blind.
But Deer and Deer Hunting Properties, this segment we're going to talk about fear of either buying or selling the property. Now, a lot of people don't talk about the fear aspect, so let's talk about from the seller side. I think the most common fear thing I see is emotion. They're attached to their property, but they're not using their property. So how do you navigate through that, right? So a lot of times they're like, hey, I've had this property for 20 plus years, but I haven't set foot on it for the last 2 or 4 or 5 years, right? So try to take the emotion out of any time you're selling a property, right? So, and that also comes with pricing. A lot of people are like, my property is better than all my neighbors, but yet it's still the exact same property as what your neighbors were. So when we take that emotion out is when you truly can get your best value for your property and your quickest sale. So how do we overcome that? Number one is time to let go, right? Let's go of the emotion of that property. You made some great memories, you have some great buck picks on it, but it's time to make your new memories. And it's time to allow that next buyer to love it as much as you did and maybe take it to the next step, right? So that's very important from the seller side of things. You know, the price with emotion is probably the most difficult. And that comes with everybody. Every person, if I didn't hear mine is the best property, I'd probably fall over, right? Because everybody's property is better than their neighbors, which is not true. So, you know, when you look at those, you'll jump on the internet, you'll see, hey, that my neighbor sold for $5,000 an acre, but you're telling me it's worth $4,000 an acre. Well, did we take into account that person has a building site, or that person already has established food plots and ag and you don't have that, or they have less swamp and you have more swamp? So those are all factors when playing in when we're looking at selling land. So make sure you listen to your professional at Deer and Deer Hunting Properties, because they want the max dollar for you also. We all want the max dollar for your property, but we also don't want your property to sit on the market. If it sits on the market too long, it will cost you money, right? That sense of urgency, that leverage goes away every day it sits on the market. So what does it tell people? It tells us, hey, buyers don't want your property, or it's overpriced, and we don't want that to come out when we're trying to get max dollar for you. Now on the buying side, there's fear also, right? So there's fear of, oh my gosh, I just went into debt for $200,000 or $300,000 and I am gonna hunt it 2 weeks out of the year, right? So there's a fear there. But as most of us are, we're huge hunters. We love it, we live it, and we breathe it, so we can overcome and justify that. But be careful. You know, if you feel like you could get in jeopardy by buying a certain dollar amount property, don't do it, because then it becomes stressful, and it shouldn't be stressful, right? It should be fun and relaxing. So if you're going over budget on something just because you need to have the best, but it's stressful, don't do it. You know, let's find you a property that's maybe not as high end, but you can do a lot of the work for it to make it high end, and it's not stressful because you didn't tax your budget, right? The other aspect is, hey, somebody has a budget that's at $3,000 an acre or $4,000 an acre, but keeps looking in the areas that are $8,000 an acre or $10,000 an acre. You know, let's keep it to what we can afford in the area we can be at and still produce the deer we're looking to and develop that property to maybe go from a $3,000 property that when you sell it in 5 years, it's worth $400 or $4,500 an acre because of the improvements we did. So as a buyer, recognize your fear. If it's becoming stressful or it will become stressful to own it, don't buy it.
That next morning, although we were in an enclosed blind, it was super cold. I mean, I had rubber boots on, my gloves weren't quite up to par, and I just kind of notched forward on my chair and I looked, oh my gosh, here comes a buck. It is really good deer hunting land. It's some of the best in North America. It is a large piece of property that Steve manages. And the deal is, I'm gonna go there and help him manage his doe herd and his buck herd. And with that buck herd, we're talking about, you know, people say management bucks. It kind of has a negative connotation. The only real reason we use that term, management buck, is this is a buck that is not gonna manifest itself to a trophy Boone and Crockett class deer. That's pretty much it. That's what we mean when we're talking about management bucks. Steve has lots of management bucks because it's a big property. It's several square miles of the best habitat in North America. I cannot overemphasize that.
Deer and Deer Hunting Properties is brought to you by Spy Point Trail Cameras. Deer and Deer Hunting Properties is brought to you by PH Outdoors.
Hey, Tim here from Analogics Outdoors. Today I want to talk about protein supplement, and it's a very important thing to do in the times of the year that everything is done growing. So when you think about when the deer have lost their velvet, all the lush green vegetation they had during the growing season is becoming non-existent. That's where protein really comes to be important, because the deer really need that extra protein to help get them in tip-top shape going into the rut, because that's going to be a intense, long marathon where they're basically just running around and not ingesting very much. So we've got a couple different options here, and it's basically a trade-off between intake and longevity. So obviously with a granular protein, this happens to be the Black Ops Deer Anthem molasses protein feed. That is going to be something they will utilize instantly and very quickly because of the intake is so well, because it's in granular form. If you're looking to do more of a long-term supplement in terms of protein, then the Deer Anthem molasses block would be the way to go. This is a 25-pound block, and where we are, we can usually get at least a month out of one of these blocks. It really all depends on how many deer are utilizing the site, but to get the best of both worlds, I actually like to put them both out in the exact same spot. So I put a block out, and that's going to be your long-term protein supplement, and then you put a granular bag right on top of it, and that way you've got the best of both worlds. You've got intake and longevity. So the important times of the year for this are going to be right before the rut, all the way through the winter, before the next growing season starts. So that's usually from October through March, and that's a time when natural protein sources have dwindled, and you got to give the deer something a little beyond what nature does, so that you know when the next growing season comes around, your deer are going to be in tip-top shape. They're going to hit the ground running in terms of antler growth because they've got everything they need. So that's all you need to help supplement your herd, is a good quality protein block and then also a granular protein feed.
So our destination was Goose Creek Outfitters near Ellesmere, Nebraska. Don't try to Google it because it doesn't even show up on the map. Very small town, pretty much in the middle of nowhere. But this is family land from Scott and LaKayla Fink, and they've come back from the city life to go back to their roots in cattle ranching, and they have a wonderful operation. It's a working cattle ranch. Scott, LaKayla, and their children all work on the farm, but when it comes to hunting season, they're all about deer hunting. First sit, we go out, we're in a ground blind. I mean, it's rattling windy. I mean, the windows are flapping, grass is swaying really bad in front of us. I thought we'd see some deer, and we saw some deer, but it shuts it down. You know, wind will shut down deer. You know, we say you hunt out west, it's windy all the time, deer are gonna move. Yes, they do, but we just didn't see quite the buck that we wanted to take on that sit. And that next morning, although we were in an enclosed blind, it was super cold. I mean, I had rubber boots on, my gloves weren't quite up to par, and that's a good tip. Make sure you bring warm gloves. And I just kind of notched forward on my chair and I look, oh my gosh, here comes a buck. That buck must have caught just a tiny bit of our scent. He turned and he went the other way. That's the rut. You never know when it's going to happen. You just never know, and that's what happened today. Is we're getting bored. We hadn't seen it. We saw some deer just like a long ways away. Nothing close. Hang on, let's just check out the side. I peek out the side. Comes a really nice buck. He was about 200 yards away when I saw him. I just saw a little glitter, and he ducked into the swamp in front of us. He was scent checking it, came through the swamp, but at the very last second he turns, and I couldn't get a shot. But always check every direction around your blind before you get out. You just never know when a deer's gonna sneak in on you. It happens so many times when you have a close call, you're rewarded with something even better. And that's what happened on this day. That morning, really low. I mean, really low, didn't get that buck, really wanted that buck. Scott said, you know, just hang tight. I got another spot, it's a little drive, it's about 20 miles down the road. Well, we're driving in there, and sure enough, deer are just running all over the place. It's in the middle of the afternoon. I'm like, did we scare them all away? He said, no, there's so many deer down in that cottonwood bottom. He said, just sit tight and be ready and be on your toes, because he said they could come from anywhere. Okay, there he is. Got him. I got him. Stay on him. Right there. Right there. Right there. Bam, we just did it. We just got our Nebraska buck. Pins and needles. I say it all the time. It happens just like that. We are covered up in deer. It's the rut, and you never know what's going to happen.
We've been sitting here, we have deer just pouring out of this river bottom. Oh my gosh, look at this. Yes, look at that. Oh, he's beautiful. He is beautiful. Look at that. 2, 3, 4, 5. He's a 10. He's a 10. You know, we were watching a 10 and he walked out of our lives. And what did the good Lord bring us? Another 10-pointer. And that one we didn't get a chance at this morning, that's why we didn't get that shot. What a dandy buck, look at that.